Hello and welcome to the third part of our tutorial with C++ and CryEngine. Um, I got some tips from some of you who have been watching. I'm going to try to apply it during this video. So first, let's just cover the overall what we're going to be doing. We're going to finish up the health slash status component and make sure that whenever an entity gets hit, depending on what entity it is and does it have a status component, go ahead and retract a arbitrary number for damage. And then after it takes away the damage, obviously we already set up the respawn, so if it does die, it will respawn. Now that's just for testing. Obviously during your game development there might be some entities or some objects or enemies or anything like that that would not need to respawn, right? So again, we can apply this for testing and just for like what we're doing. But again, for your instance of what you are developing, just make sure you take a side note and say, wait, what am I doing? Does this object need to respawn or not? Or does this need to do a different functionality when it does die, and so on and so forth. This is just helping you get started understanding the principle, and then you just take principle, apply it to what you're doing. So we're going to cover that, and then we're also going to be covering, once we're done with the status component, we're actually going to be jumping into kind of a mixture of programming and then a mixture of character modeling. Not character modeling as in modeling your character, but setting up a rig and stuff like that, so then we can access it through code and do some fun stuff. So I am going to show that actually during this tutorial too, so this is why this tutorial might be a little bit longer, because we're not only just going to do in code, we're going to do some rigging and then exporting into the engine and testing and then making sure that works, and then from there jumping back to code and then applying what we need to do in code to our entity. So we're just going to get, and also before we get started on that, we're also going to create a new component. So right now I'm inside the solution folder here. Let me just minimize that. So we're inside our solution folder, right? And let's just back up to the game directory. Again, I do it this way. There's many ways that you can do this. I just prefer to do it this way. What I'm going to do is go to code folder, inside components. We have weapons, spawn, and then player. Inside weapons, all we have is bullet. That's fine. But what we're going to do is actually create a new component. So new text document, and we're actually going to call this weapon component, or weapon base component .cpp. And then remember, copy the name, right? New text document, paste that same name .h. So identical names, one's just a CPP and one's a header file. So back to our game directory, let's go ahead and right click and generate our solution. Generate solutions, and let's open up our solution here. So now we have our new weapon component, and that's going to be utilized later in the tutorial. We're going to build up our weapon component so that way we can dictate how weapons interact with objects and it being attached to our player. So that's why we're building that, or setting it up early. So with this, as we left off, we have physics collision, and there was something that that was posted in the Discord from one of the guys from Crytek. This was amazing for him to do that. If you go up to coding, there it is. As you remember last time, I was trying to remember how to return an entity that was being collided, and thank you, CryThomas, for that. He's pointed out like, hey, this is what you're looking for. And then it also is an array. So this is important to note. It is an array which holds 2 pointers of 2 entities involved in the collision. So we have entity 1 and entity 0. 1 and 2. So let's do these 2 entities, 0 and 1, which is 1 and 2. And let's just paste that code right inside here. And as you can see, I said I found something, entity 1. And I'm just going to delete this cry log. So physics collision, right? When this parameter gets fired off, it says, hey dude, there has been something within physics that 2 entities have collided. And what we want to know is, A, does this physics does this object that we hit have a specific component that we need, right? So what we're going to do is say auto, and if you remember this, auto, and we're going to say P, because this is going to be a pointer reference, P entity equals, and then what it's going to equal is game environment. So we're going to say game environment, and then we're going to say P entity system, get entity from physics. This function here, get entity from physics, takes in a pointer, right? And this pointer is I physical entity. Well, there it is up there. So that's perfect. So what we can do is say retrieve. I believe number 2 is what we need. Retrieve this entity. Once we retrieve this entity, we're going to check. So P entity, right? So if, and we can say does not equal, and I believe I can say null or null pointer. So if this is not equal null pointer, then let's do something. Let's say P entity, and then we can say get component C status component, right? So P entity get status component, get component C status component. This right here is fine, but this is not technically what we're looking for. We're going to do another auto. What we're going to say is auto P status equals this. So now P status inherits this status component, right? And then we can do another check. It's good to keep doing these checks like this to make sure that if it does error, it just errors out and it doesn't stop your code. It doesn't like freeze up. So if this is true, if not, it will just, continue on and do what it's doing. So if this is true, then we're going to say, first we can say crylog found status, right? So that way we can confirm that this is absolutely working properly. Save. Let's go ahead and build. And iEntity is a local variable and we're not using it, so let's go ahead and just comment this out and let's move on and build again. Succeed. And what we're going to do is launch the editor. So let's say set up a startup project editor. Let's go ahead and launch Window Debugger. And what we're going to do is apply some status components to some of the boxes. That way we can check out, make sure this is working properly. So let's open up our example level. We have one box with the, whoops, this camera's bugging out. Let me slow down the speed. There we go. So we have one box here with it. So let's give all these boxes a status component. Oop, this one has it. Okay, this one already had it. This one doesn't, so let's add it. Game status. And add game status. Add game status. Add game status component. We can do the same thing for these. Status. And the last one. Game status. Alright, perfect. So all these have it. Let's save. Let's export to engine. It gives us a warning, and that warning can be fixed by saying collision mesh. Nope, don't want that. What we want is tools. Where are you? I just saw that error too. It says it's talking about this right here, this navigation. Wants to make sure that it was kind of baked out, and I kind of forgot how to make sure that gets put out. Debug, that just reloads it, and here's advance. That's Sylvie, never mind, that's something else. Oh, that's fine, whatever, export. So let's go ahead and exit, save our changes. Now let's go ahead and switch back to the game launcher, and let's go ahead and launch the game. And we're just going to check here in the log and make sure that we get found status. See? Found status. So I found the status. Good. Let's hit something else. Let's hit this wall. Nothing. So you see found status came up for the box, but when we hit the wall, nothing showed up. That means that this right here became null, and it was not true. Therefore, nothing was found. And we can just do a breakcode to double check it. So let's kind of put out a guy in front of this box. Bam. There it is. True. There's the health value. So here's everything for this component from this entity. So here's our entity. And here's our status. So let's go ahead and stop the code. So we found the status. Let's apply damage. Now there's a few ways we can do it. We can set a constant float number up here in this header file. This is called damage, or we can just say, you know, something else. I'm trying to think what would be a better way, but for right now, for testing purposes, we'll just do p status set health. And remember, set health, all it does is just takes what we want and then applies it. So let's do another function and say void set damage, and then we'll say it takes in a float, and we'll say it takes damage, right, damage value, which then automatically what it will do is say, hey, get status. Well, we'll take this code up here and just paste it down here. Take this, and then right after the equal sign, paste it with the minus, and then all we need to do is make sure damage is here. All is good. So this health will now equal what it is currently minus the damage. So we'll save that, go back to bullet.h, and we're not going to do set health, we're just going to say set damage, and our damage value is 25, right? So it's simple 25. We'll save, we'll build XCOM. Once it builds, good, and we'll test. And what we're going to do is test right here. We're going to stop the code at 85, and you'll see why. So back to our level, bam. Let's look at, probably should have stopped it at status, honestly. Let's stop this. Let's go ahead and say found status, set damage. I'll say cry log, or actually, no, it's fine. I know this is working because we found the status and we set the damage, but we want to make sure we set the damage properly to the entity, not ourselves. So we can do another check here, and we can say, is it just a couple ways we can skin this cat. Remember back in player CPP, we have on the RMI function, player get entity. If the entity is ourself, then don't do anything. So we can kind of do the same thing here, but this takes the deconstructor of C player component P entity. And what we're doing in bullet, we're just looking for the entity, and if it doesn't equal no pointer, right? So we can also say, hey, P entity, we can also get the player component and double check to make sure that we are not the player, right? So what we'll do is say auto P player equals P entity dot pointer get component, and then we'll say C player component, and we'll say if not player, then do this bit of code in here. We'll get rid of this code. Right, so now we're looking at like this. We're saying, hey, entity, get this, right? If this is unable to get it, we know we're not messing with the player component. We're actually just hitting something that just has the C status component. So let's save, build, and check. Save, build, and check. Because remember, we have these two entities right up here, 0 and 1, right? I already know the answer to this, but you might not know, so this is a good way to validate and check. I'm going to spacebar, found status. So there you go. So it went through this, it didn't find anything. It said, hey dude, couldn't find. See, null. There is no player component on this entity. So we're good to go to the next step. And that's our quick check right here. So this right here, again, auto, it's very useful. We did our check and said, hey, are we the player? Because if we are the player, we don't want to damage ourselves. We just want to damage the enemy. So that's a good way to do a check on it. Again, there's different ways and methods that you can do this. I'm just showing you one. And again, this is, obviously, as you can tell, this works just fine. We can just do a confirmation on entity ID. Just like on the player.cpp, we can say, do these two entity IDs match? Which is actually probably a better way to do it. Because let's say we do want C player component to be on the enemy. Well, then this would always become true, and then we'll never do this. But what we're going to do is create the enemy logic. So therefore, player component would actually never be involved in that. So for now, this works. So let's save everything we did, and let's double check everything that we have done. So let's remove this CryLog. We don't need this here. CryLogs are very useful to see where in your code that you're executing. We have our physics collision. Everything's looking good. It deletes the entity after it is finished. This is the bullet component. Our status component, we have set damage. We have our check for alive. We have our get status. So pretty much looking good. Now what we're going to do too, I remember in the last video I said we're going to talk about enums and adding it to it. In this video too, for this video, I said earlier that we're going to just finish up status and then move on to the aspect of adding the character model, rigging it, and then accessing it through code. But there's one little misstep that I forgot to say, and that misstep is that we want to create a simple state machine in a sense. Now, state machines, I'm on the fence with them. I really don't like state machines. They have their purpose. They've been used throughout almost every single game has some form of state machine. It's just a lot of boiler code, and I don't like it. And there's a lot of new methods coming out, and methods years ago too that they become mainstream that are a lot better than state machines. One of them is IK moving the your bones during runtime depending on where it hits. To get into detail with that, if you understand foot placement in CryEngine is a form of IK solver, which then, there's a raycast shot down at your feet, and it just sees where your feet need to be planted and then moves the bones accordingly and place your feet properly on certain objects during runtime without you doing anything. It just does it. We'll also get into that later down the line, but for right now, let's just set up a simple state status. So right now we have our status just for health and stamina, but we can add something else, and we're going to do it outside of the class. So what we're going to do is add a enum class, and we're going to call this e character state. So e character state, right? Let's just have some simple states. Let's have and for me, what I like to do when I create certain enums, I like to take, again, this is e, so we know it's an enum, So ECS, I'm going to say ECS, so I know that it stands for the enum and then character state. And then for some reason that just went bing. I'm going to say alive equals 0. Equals 0 is fine. And then I'm going to say ECS low health or injured, probably injured. And then we'll say ECS dead. So simple 3 states, right? Alive, injured, dead. But this is kind of state representation of your health, right? And we can have actually more states of this. We can say, hey, besides character status state, so let's change this to E character status states, and then we can have another state, enum class, E character state. So this would be the actual state, and we can say ECS, but we'll call this SS, ECSS, ECSS, ECSS. So we have alive, injured, dead. And then for this one, we're going to say idle, maybe, or wandering. Let's see, what can we do with status state? We're making something like XCOM, and the XCOM games, the enemy states are either patrolling or alerted. So we can go with that. Patrolling or patrol. And then we'll say ECS alerted. And then we'll take these 2 states up here, and what we're going to do is apply it to our reflect type. So to do that, what we need to do too is actually create a reflect type. So right below our enum, and let's start with character state because this is up to you. We'll say static void reflect and type equals schematic C type description E character state destructor description, and that's it. So now we can say descript set GUID, first thing we need to do, quotations, then underscore cry GUID, semicolon, and tools, create GUID, make sure we're on number 4. I hit new a couple times, copy, then we can close that, and inside between these 2 quotations, control V, then we can say descriptions set label, and then we can say character state, then we can say description set description, set the start state of this entity, and then we'll say description set default value. So default value in a sense just means, hey, what is the default value on our selection, right? Obviously it is patrol, so that's the one that we're going to use. So we're going to say EC character state, patrol is our default value. Then we're going to say description, I don't know if that means description, but I'm guessing, so descript dot, and then we're going to say add constant, and then our constant, see, it already knows too. I love that it just automatically tells you, like, hey, what's your constant, and it kind of tells you already your constant is going to be of the E character state. So we're going to use patrol, comma, now I just need a name and a label. So we're going to say for label, double quotations, oh my god, I keep doing that. So double quotations, patrol, and then comma, our label is also patrol, semicolon, and then we're going to add the other state. So add constant, the character state, alerted, and then alerted, comma, alerted, semicolon, and then with this, let's go ahead and copy our E character state, and we're going to scroll down to our, not this protected, but this protected, and we're going to just paste E character state with the deconstructor and say M character state. And here, right below this add number, we're going to add a number member, deconstructor C status components colon M character state. We're going to say C stat like that, and then we're going to say character state as one word, and character state again, but separate words, space, and then comma, we can say null pointer because we already have a description, and then we're going to say E character states, right, and then set the default value patrol. And with that, we should be good. So, and we have this curly brackets, and oh, this right here. Get rid of that deconstructor. So there we go. Save. Let's build. Succeed, and let's launch the editor and double check to make sure all is good. Let's open our example. Let's go ahead and find one of our boxes. So we'll click on this guy, and then right here, as you can see, character state, patrol, alerted, patrol, alerted. There's our both states. Drop down menu, and we can select which state that we want him to be in first. Awesome. And again, this is a great use of an enum, and how to expose it to the editor. You just, as you saw, we expose our enum to the editor, and it gives us this cool drop down menu, and then we can change what we want the state to be. So let's go ahead and just close without saving. So pretty quickly, we created a enum class just for the state. We'll do one for status state, but we'll touch that in a minute. So we did our character status state, which is this alive, injured, dead, and then we have our E character state itself, which is this patrol, and then alerted. We created a reflect type for it. This reflect type allows us to expose this enum to the editor. We set the GUID, label, description, and I have to sneeze. Oh my goodness. So description, we set the default value, which is important, the default value, and then we set the two constants. Our two constants within our E character state. Now you might be wondering, what if I take away alerted? Will this still work? It will still work, actually. So you might have maybe like 20 different states, and you might not want to say, ooh, I don't want to expose all of my states to the editor, or for someone to mess around with it, because some of it might be hard-coded. Again, you don't need to add it. But for right now, we added both of these, and then we made sure we made our member right here, and then we added that to our master, so our C status component, and we just added it here, and we made sure, just like as we called the strut, this is how you call a strut, right? And then for our enum, we called it like this. Hey, add the enum and make sure you give it this default value. Now if I take away that default value, you get this, because this type is not allowed. So you must give it the value, which is your default value. Make sure it's your default value. I'm sure you don't have to. I haven't tried it that way, but it's best practice. Give it the default value, which would be patrol. So all is good. So let's save everything. Make sure always save, right? Anything else? So we added our state, and we're going to build upon that first. Before we can build upon that, we kind of have to change gears and move on to our next step. So with this in mind, we can leave our Visual Studios running, and now we're going to open up our 3D program. So I'm using 3ds Max 2021. It's not a student version. You can use the student version and you can follow along. Just make sure when you do set up Max that we go to the CryEngine, go to your library, go to My Engines, right here at the 3 dots, go to Dependencies, and make sure under Tools and Plugin that you've done the CryTools installer. If you hit install, it's telling me to uninstall, but if I hit install and I hit next, it kind of knows every program that I have and it's going to install it for me. It does not recognize 2021, obviously, but you can use the SDK, and I'll show you which plugin. So I'm going to cancel this, but if you're running with Max, I think 2020, 2019, 2018 is recognized. 2021 isn't recognized yet. Hopefully they'll fix that. But for right now, the actual plugin for, yes. So if I go to this gear icon, reveal in File Explorer, not CryMax Tools, 3ds Max, here we go, plugins. This one right here works with 2021. It works. It's a little bit funky, but it works. And you just have to drop that into plugins under Max. So, and then obviously everything's good in here. So let me just close that out. So I'm going to go off a model that I have. Let me find it. There we go. So first things first, we do have a character. It is the default character that Crytek has for the template. But you might be working with your custom character, right? And you might be at a point where, yeah, I'm programming, but I can't really test much stuff out because I don't have the character that my game is using, which is more important than the template character. Template character is useful for a lot of testing, but you might want to use yours specialized character to do the actual testing. So we're going to go ahead and jump into that. I have this that I purchased myself for our tutorial series, and it's this SWAT guy here. So pretty cool guy. And he actually starts off in the wrong position. He's facing the wrong way. He's supposed to be facing Y. He's facing not the positive Y. And he has his own rig. Now, if you do receive a model that's like this, first thing that I will tell you to do is grab the entire rig. So let me make sure I have everything unhidden. There we go. I'm going to say highlight the first one, highlight the last one, and then Control A gives me everything in between. I don't want the geometry, but I do want all these helpers. And the reason why is because these bones are stupid and they can't animate them. This rig is kind of set up in a format that you can do motion builder, which I have, and then you can do some mocap. You might not have a mocap studio or something to do motion capturing like I do, so I'm going to show you a better way to do it. I highly advise if you do use mocap data, I won't get into much of it. There's a lot of things you need to do to get it really working well, but I would advise you to use 3ds Max, and the reason why is for cat animations. Cat animating or cat rigs are fantastically awesome. Ooh, hit my mic. Fantastically awesome for someone who's just learning to animate or just kind of want to get a prototype out, who doesn't really know animation. So I'm taking this rig, highlighted everything. I don't need any of that, so I'm going to delete it. So that's deleted, and you notice that I select this folder, so I'm on this folder. I'm going to select the model, which he is centered in the world-ish, but he's facing the wrong way. So I'm going to click on the rotate tool, modify list. I'm going to go to X form, and then turn on snapping and percentage, and then I'm just going to do a 180 rotation. Hit W for the move tool. See, selected move is W, E is rotate, and we have scaling. So with that, I'm just going to eyeball it for right now, and I'm just going to move him, make sure he's kind of like dead center on 0, 0 world origin. That's the best I can do for right now. Front view, make sure this line kind of splits him in half as best as possible. Good, so he's pretty much dead center. Front view. We're looking not at the feet per se, but kind of the hips. Probably bring him forward more. There we go, so that looks good. Now with this X form, with everything still selected, I'm going to say collapse all. Yes. And then that's it. So now what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to say, hey, freeze this entire layer. And we're going to move on to, actually, let me unfreeze that. Select him. Alt X. You might see that, but Alt X, then freeze. And he should be see-through, which he's not. That's fine. Let's just go to wireframe override. There we go. Now in here we're going to say under create object, we're going to move over to helpers. Change this from standard to cat objects, cat parent, and just left click and drag out. And you kind of want it in like not too big. You don't want it like this. Don't want it like this. You kind of want it pretty much about this size. And then right click, so you're not creating another one. Go to the modify tab, modify list, X for X form, and we're going to rotate this also to 180. We're going to say collapse to, yes. W, make sure this is in 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, little zeros. And right now we have some presets. We have BIP01, we have all these cool presets that we can use, but it's best to create your own. And I like to use the bit format. So by bit format, I mean this. For name, you see it says character 001. I'm going to change this to BIP, BIP 0101, and then enter. Once that's done, I'm going to say create pelvis. Now, since the model is frozen, I don't have to worry about accidentally selecting him. I can see, use all the viewports. This is really key to this process. So with this, I'm going to say, okay, your hips are not this low. They're about this high, a little bit forward. This is kind of like your waistband here, and your hips kind of lie in this position. That's good. And I'm going to change this name from hub. I'm going to say space hips. And the reason why I'm calling it hips, not pelvis, again, this is my preference. You can put pelvis. I say hips is because I use Motion Builder and we do retargeting. And when you want to retarget something in Motion Builder, they kind of have a setup where they use a certain naming convention. You don't have to follow the same naming convention, but it makes it easier if you do. So that's why I do it this way. Again, you don't have to do it, call it hips. You can say pelvis. I'm just letting you know this is why I call it hips. So for hips, I'm going to say add leg. Then not moving the leg itself, but this platform here, I'm just going to move it in place where it needs to go. And I'm going to make sure that length is a little bit bigger than the foot and a little bit wider than the foot. That's good. The second thing I want to do is on the uppermost bone, so the first bone in this chain, I'm going to say, it's not called, I'm going to get rid of this LL leg and just say space left. And then for bone name, I'm just going to say take away 1. And I'm going to call this upper leg. Then for the second one, I'm going to change this from 2, space calf, that's fine, you can do that. But for another program that I use, I need to call this just leg. And then for ankle, this is technically an ankle, but it's not. This is actually our space foot. Now you're probably wondering, what about your toe? Well, we just go to number of digits. We'll say one digit, and we get technically 2. We get 1 digit with an extra bone, and we don't need that extra bone. So let's get rid of that and just say 1. And let's call under name, let's change this to toe base. Toe base 1 is fine. I believe 0 will not work. Let's check. Oh yeah, 0 works perfect. So toe base 0. And then I'm going to do is eyeball this by the side view and just move it right where his toe should be. So this crease forward, I want this bone to really affect this area. So that's kind of his toes. And the width is the width of his foot, so that works perfectly. And his ankle is actually pretty good position, because I'm thinking, you have to think about anatomy. Where does the ankle kind of lay in? Where these two bones meet, this gizmo is where the bend is going to happen. So the bend is right here, across this imaginary line. And we're looking at, yeah, you see the geometry. It's a good spot for the bend. I could probably bring the ankle down lower, so controlling just the length, I can probably bring it down to this, right about there. That looks good. Now I'm going to go to the leg again, where the two joints meet at this gizmo is the rotation point, the pivot point. And I'm just going to move that. As you can see, his knee's kind of like right here. That's his knee. So I'm going to say, all right, let's bring that in. And you don't want it up and down, like straight up and down. You want it kind of bent forward. And bring it down a little bit. So remember that. Don't keep it straight up and down. Bend it a little bit forward. This only really applies to cat rigs. Other rigs, I think the regular bit rig, it's fine. But for cat rigs especially, do not leave a joint without a little bit of bend. Because it's going to, there's this auto part to it where it tries to figure out how to bend it automatically for you. And if it doesn't know which way to bend forward, it'll just make up its own mind and it looks like trash. So make sure you bend it a little bit forward so it knows like, hey, this is the forward part of the bend. So let's look at the front view of it. It's okay for the bone to stick out. This is actually just fine. We can probably skew it to the right a little bit. And for the hip placement, we can bring that in and down some because it's like a socket. And that's it. So we have the left leg set up. And the great thing about cat is if I go back to the hips and I say add leg, it automatically does one for me as best as it can to match the opposite side. Obviously, sometimes it's not perfect. You might have to adjust it. So looking at it right now, doesn't look like I need to adjust it. Let's look at the knee. It's looking good. Okay, so it looks good. Now I'm going to say add spine. I'm going to select the first bone in that spine. And this is a little trick to get nice bending deformation of the spine. Let's move this up to where these two joints meet, right where they overlap. So we can break it down just right where they, a little bit below. So right there. And we don't need 5 bones. We just need 3. So let's change that number to 3. And then scrolling up, let's go over to the next hub, or as it call it, hips. And let's change this to spine 4. Because this is actually part of the spine bone. And we're just going to move this down to about right here. We're looking for where the clavicle, again, this is dealing with human anatomy. It starts right here. Like when you break your clavicle, it's right here. And we kind of want it to, this upper part of this bone to meet right there. So this is pretty good spot. And its width or its length is pretty good. We can probably bring it in some. Okay, works for me. Next thing we're going to do is add the arm. Alright, so with the arm added, we have the collarbone. It's called L-arm collarbone. Let's change L-arm to just space left. And then collarbone, we're going to give it a space. That way it's not like right here, if you look on the left-hand side in this viewport, we don't want collarbone to be sandwiched with the left. If you give it a space, it looks better. So with that in mind, we can keep the size of the collarbone as it is. I don't really like that. I kind of bring it in some, like so. Make it look more like a collarbone in a sense. That's good. And then for the arm, we're going to change it from 1 to upper arm. And then for the next part, the forearm, we have an option. For the forearm, we can leave it as it is, or we can add a segment to it so we can get some little bit of twist to it. I advise you to use a twist bone. It gives it kind of a more natural look to it when you're animating and you're turning the wrist around. You get that little extra twist from your forearm. And if you look at your actual arm itself, when you try to keep your arm straight and just rotate your hand, you notice your wrist, your forearm kind of twists with your wrist, right? That's a natural movement that you do. And you don't really get that with just one bone within the forearm. So what we can do is say segments 2, and now we get these 2 segments. And for right now, let's change segments back to 1, and let's set up the hand so that way it looks better. So this is the hand bone. We're going to say number of digits 5 because this guy has 5 fingers. And I totally forgot. Let's change it from view to local. It's fine for right now. So with that in mind, let's make sure we move our hand into place and rotate it. This is on view. Let's change this to local also. So let's rotate the bones. And what we're looking for, as you can see, I'm just looking for the crease where the wrist where your wrist joint moves actually. So E, let's go to rotate. Bring this in. I'm trying to get a top-down view of the hand as best as I can. And just, again, I'm slicing the wrist point because I know that this origin point right here, this pivot, is where the wrist would actually bend, and we can bring it back just a little bit and then rotate this view and then bring it down into the hand. Looks good. Alright, and then back to the forearm. Let's create our segments 2. Alright, and now since this is the first part of the segment, right, we're gonna say forearm, and since this is the second, we'll say forearm, get rid of the 2 and just say twist. And this one, we can probably just get rid of the 1. No, it still wants to put 1 there. That's fine, we can leave the 1 there. So forearm, twist, and then we have our hand, which is called palm for some odd reason. So get rid of palm, space, hand. Okay, now this next part is I'm gonna try to explain as best as I can. There's 2 ways you can do the hand. You can have the actual hand bone encapsulate the hand, stopping at the knuckle points. That works. Will you get a more natural look? Not really. Now, what I like to do, and what I noticed from the game SDK character rig 2, which is the place that I saw it, and then once I did it, I was like, wow, this is a lot better, is what to do, instead of having 3 bones for the fingers, make 4 bones. And the reason behind that is, if I can pull up a picture, can I pull up a picture really quick? No, that's okay. if you look at the skeleton of your actual hand, your hand bone itself is actually very small. You actually have these long finger bones that go out to your knuckle. That's one segment of it, and then it breaks down to the 3 segments of your finger bone. So you have these long bones go into a small bone hand, pretty much, and then 2 wrists. So we're going to mimic that, and that's actually a more better way to do it, in my humble, honest opinion. So with that in mind, what I mean is we're going to take this bone and we're just going to shrink it down. Shrink it down. We're going to say height, right? The height of the bone that's fine. We can say 4, or actually I like that 4.8. That was a nice size. And then for the width, we can say 3. Nope, 3 is way too small. Let's bring that number up. So 8 looks good, and then 5 looks good too. Alright, so now we have this going on, right? And we're like, well, what the heck? Don't worry. What we're going to do is start with the thumb. So the first bone in this hierarchy, we're going to say number of bones, 4. We're going to change the name digit to thumb. And then what we're going to do is bring the width down to probably about 1.2, depth to 1.2. So it's like a perfect square in a sense. That looks good. And then the next joint or next finger is your index, so space index, number of bones 4, and then same thing, 1.2, 1.2 for width and depth. Move on to the middle finger, highlight that, change this to middle. And the reason why I'm using these name conventions is because a lot of motion capturing stuff use the same kind of naming convention. So if you follow the same naming convention I'm using, it helps. But again, that's kind of with my motion capturing system. If you're using Maximo or Miximo, right, to grab mocap data, best thing you could do, grab the skeleton from Miximo or Maximo, write down the name for the whole skeleton rig, like how it's named, and then create your own rig with the same naming, and then you can just retarget the animation onto your custom rig. And since the naming are the same, it becomes easier to do that. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to import your model into Maximo and then have it create the rig for it auto create the rig for you. But the Maximo auto rigging is pretty horrendous. It cannot do hands properly, so you have to redo your hands, and then it breaks everything in a sense. It's better just to make your own rig, name it in the same principle, than use Motion Builder or some form of program that you can retarget the animation and just retarget it. That's the best method to do it. So moving on, we have our middle, and we can change the values to 1.2, 1.2. Let's go to our ring finger. Oh, not ring finger, I'm sorry. It is ring finger. Ring. And then 4 bones. 1.2. Whoops. 1.2. 1.2. And then last one is pinky. Pinky. And again, 4. 1.2. 1.2. Done. So that's all set up and good. And now the tedious part. So double clicking on any of the bones in the hierarchy will auto select down the line. So by that, I just double click on thumb number 2, and now I'll get all 3 of these, and I'm gonna move this into place. So I'm still on local, right? And just moving it kind of where, and this is where you hopefully have a good model of a hand. Because if you look at your hand, the first bone connected to this bone is actually pretty small. It goes out to here, and you have a longer bone, and then it cuts down to its segment. So I'm trying to mimic that same architect that your hand does. Again, this is just eyeballing it, rotating to make sure you have it in the right spot. I'm paying attention to this portion here where the two bones meet. So that's where I'm focusing my attentions right there. So where the two bones meet, that looks pretty good. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is go to rotate, and don't rotate with the three bones selected because you get this. Don't want that. Make sure you select the bone just itself and then rotate, and then it'll automatically push everything, as you can see. And what I'm looking for is, you see this pivot? Let me move the camera. This ham bone, bam, it stops here, comes down. This right here is where this is the bend, and I know that. So what I'm going to do is change the length, bring it out some, so it kind of meets at that spot. Let me look dead center at the thumb. And bring it out a little bit. Let me turn off snapping and angles so I can get more precision. Okay, looks pretty good. There's the crease here, so maybe just a little bit more. Then with that, I'm going to bend this a bit. And then as you can see, I have these two loops here. That's the, whoops, not width, length. Right with these two, right in between these two loops. Get that into there. That's fine. And then this one bend a little bit and bend down a little bit. Oh, as you can see, my thumb is not aligning, so let's click the first one, bring it down it like that, and probably bring it up a little bit. Again, I'm rotating the camera, trying to get, alright, looks good. Now for the next one, index. This becomes easier because all you need to do is bring it to the knuckle. So selecting, double clicking on the second bone, which then selects all three, I am just looking for this part right here, this knuckle part, and that works for me. Yep, probably bring it back just a little bit. Alright, bring it down some. And now, select that bone, E to rotate. Whoops, and I'm just going to rotate down. Yeah, that looks good. And then rotate a little bit so it's centered on the finger. Still looking good. And then now, since I have these two markers here, I know for sure that all I need to do is bring it out. Select the next one, bend it just a little bit. It's already there, perfect. And then take this one, bend it just down a little bit, or a little bit more. I'll probably bend this down a little bit more, and then bend this back up. There. And then same thing to the middle finger now. So first I'm just gonna make sure, and I tell you right now, it's best to also select the ring finger, push this out of the way, kind of set it up where it should be, and then pinky finger, push this down, kind of leave it there so it's kind of out of that way, because it helps when you can visualize it better. So now, whoops, select all three. I'm just paying attention to where these points meet. Bring it back a little bit. Looks good. Now I'm going to rotate to center it. Alright, that looks good. Then let's up the length. Then bring it down, because the fingers are naturally bending in a relaxed position. That looks good. Bring the length out a bit. I'm going to bring this out just a tad bit, so we can just take this next one, bring it out, and just bend it down a little bit. Looking good. Alright. Now to the ring finger. Move tool. Let's set it up where it should go. And as you can see, it's a little low. It's actually too low, so let's bring it up higher. The objective is, and same thing with this one actually, now look at it. You kind of want to, like, again, use your hand, your actual hand as reference. You notice your bones are up to your skin, like really, really like close to your skin. A lot of your bones do that too. You don't need to do it per se when it comes to these bones, but when it comes to the hand bones, they get that very natural look. Get it not too close to the top. It's really hard to explain, but try to get it as close as you can ish. Because believe me, you'll get a nicer natural bend look out of it, or deformation, and it really does. The little extra time you put into it, it makes a huge difference. So I'm just going to rotate. Whoops, you see I did that problem. I just need to rotate the bone itself, not the chain. That looks good, so let's bring it down some. Looks good. So all I need to do is make sure the length kind of sits in between. Bring this down some, bring the length back in. There, that looks good. And then for the next one, bring that in. And as you can see, it's off a bit. So back to the first bones, rotate that to the center. And now that's looking way better. I can probably bring this, whoops, back to this bone. I can probably bring it down a little bit more. See, I'm staying pretty close to the top still. And just by doing that, everything kind of falls into place pretty good. And then for this one, I'm going to bring it back out just a tad. Again, you see every bone kind of has a little bend to it, because it tells the system when I do select all three, bend, it bends in on that way. See? Because I gave it that little bend. If all these bones are straight, like straight as an arrow, then doing this part right here would turn out funky. And you get some good artifacts. So off to the pinky. Last one, pinky in the brain. So let's push this up. Alright, let's get the first bone, E. Center it, or center it as best as we can. Alright, let's get our bends going now. So bend this down a bit. Again, this is the skin, so right about the edge top of it, which is good. Maybe a little bit higher. Next bone. Oop, you see it's a little bit, this one is pushed back. So let's bring it center more. Bring this length in. Pinky has small bones, and let's bring that in. And then this bone here, just a little bend, not too much. A little one too for this one. Alright, looking good. Sweet. All looks good. Again, take your time. I've been doing this for a while, so for me it's a little bit faster. But as you can tell, this now looks more like a skeleton hand. Like this actually looks like the bones in your hand. And believe me, it's going to look great when we animate it. Okay, so back to the arm. Let's go ahead and bring that in. And what I'm looking for the arm, this right here, this pivot point needs to be more inside. Like just like your arm is. It's like a socket that sits inside. So let's bring it. Again, you have to visualize this the best way you can. And we see that this right here is where the bend is going to happen. So let's get this best as we can there. That looks good. Alright, and then for the elbow, not this twist joint, the first one here, we can now move this into place. And we're going to make sure we're kind of in between the mesh. And using the Y, like I said, or this center origin right here where these 2 points meet, that's our elbow bend. So looking at this right here, we actually naturally bend more inwards to your forearm. So like that. And we'll probably bring it down even more. Like so. Alright, anything looks bad if it doesn't come out right, we can always go back and move the bones and reskin. So back to the spine 4, since we did all this work, whoops, one more thing. This is too forward. We need to make sure that this is back. There we go. That is exactly what you want it to look like. Alright, now spine forward. Add arm. Done. Look at that. Freaking done. Now, there are some times where if it's not symmetrical, if your model, for some odd reason, the modeler or whoever models it doesn't make each half symmetrical, in the sense like the hand is symmetrical to the other hand, you might have to go into your other hand and just fix up any parts that might not look like in place properly. But this one looks absolutely fine to me, so we'll just roll with it. And that looks fine to me too for the arm, and we'll just continue. So the next thing, as you notice, we don't have anything called neck here, and there's two ways to do it. To make a neck and a head bone, you can use tail. I've seen it done that way. You can just add a bone and just add a bone on top of that. I've seen it done that way, but I like to use another spine. So clicking spine, it creates a new spine hierarchy above. Again, let's click on the first portion, bring this up to right here. And number of bones, we're going to change this to 1, and then we're going to change the name from spine to just neck. And now, make sure we give it a space right here. So now we have the neck bone. Looks pretty funky. But what we can do, using the X, Y, Z right here, or even the size, we can bring it in some, like so. Right. Well, that's about good. It's a good neck bone. Now for the head, or change this. Whoops, change this space. Head. So this is the part where it becomes a little bit finicky. So right here, what we're gonna do is make sure the length, right? If you're gonna do facial rigging, then your head bone the length needs to be inside. For better results, I'm just talking about better results, make the head bone length about this and set it with the height of your actual kind of skull. So what we're looking at is this point to this point. We see that this is the skull. This point to this point kind of gets close enough to the jaw, which is good enough. And then front view, the width needs to be at least to where your ears, like, you can't see it on him because he has no ears, but you see this little lump here, that's the ear, where the ear connects to your side of your head. At that point, is where the width should be. You don't want the width to be at the edge of your ears. You want it where your ears and your head meet. So this right here is set up good to be used to add more bones to have like a face rig. Now I'm not going to do a face rig, so for me I'm going to say, hey, length, go ahead and push out to right about where the eyes start, or even more. I can probably get away with the nose bridge. And then for the length, since we're not doing a facial rig, or height I mean, we can bring this down up a little bit more. See, I'm looking at the front view, top of the skull, closer to the jaw, and this works just fine. And since he has this collar, I don't want the head to really encapsulate the collar, so I'm just going to bring the height back up a bit. You'll see why. Since we have this collar here, this will make skinning a lot easier, believe me. Alright, so that looks good. Our neck bone is situated in the correct position. If it's not, we can just go like this and kind of bring it back some, right? Because your neck bone actually starts here. It's not this is your throat. There's no bone right here. Your neck is actually very close to the skin of your back. So we're kind of mimicking that same attribute. And to the front view, let's just make sure that we don't, yeah, that's fine. What I'm trying to make sure is that we're still kind of touching this spine forebone. Okay, looks good. So let's go back to spine 1, because right here in the left hand side there's no space. So I'm going to just go give it a space. Everything looks good. Um, we're just touching up the naming convention. So the left side is named properly, but the right side is pretty funky. So change this to our leg to right. Make sure we have that space too. And then for the arm, start at the collarbone. Change this to enter right. And now everything should look pretty organized in our list. Thumb. Didn't do it onto the fingers, but we can do that. I thought I did. Space. That already has a space. Our thumb didn't for some reason. Looks good. Looks good. The other thumb needs to have that too, so first bone in the thumb. Give it space. Now it looks nice and neat. Neatness is important. Alrighty. So, hard part done. Yay! Now this is the interesting part that we can do. Crytek allows us to set up a base rig and then set up extra bones on top of the base rig that can be connected either in real time or set up in the character tool. And what I mean by that is, as you notice, the game SDK rig had a weapon bone, right? Our rig does not have a weapon bone. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even have anything for attachment points. But what we can do is create attachment points by going back to create object, standard, dummies. So with creating dummies, and again, I like to keep myself organized. Before I even create this dummy, I'm going to go to this explorer on the left hand side. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this dummy or extra underscore bones. And since I had this selected and moved it to there, so I'm going to move this back to where it needs to go in the layers. So with this layer selected, what we're going to do is create a dummy. And size doesn't really matter, but try to keep it in retrospect to what you're doing. So first dummy, I'm going to name this dummy maybe weapon position. Or even I can say weapon bone, honestly. Right? Weapon bone. Then I can holding down shift, left click and hold on the Z gizmo. It allows me to copy this. Don't make an instance and do not make a reference. We're making a copy. And we can say holster, I think that's how you spell it. Holster position. So we have these two extra dummies. One is weapon bone, one is holster position. So taking this weapon bone, right, we can just put it to the hand bone. Whoop. And kind of eyeball it to where it needs to go. And I did this on the top view. Now this is one way to do it. Again, I like showing people multiple ways to do something. So we can create this here, right? Whatever this is facing the right way automatically. So whatever we attach to it immediately be pointing to the Y direction. And then we can, E rotate it, W, get it in a position where it kind of meets the hand. And then we can make this the child of the hand bone, and that works. There's another way to do this. And let's go ahead and delete this weapon bone. This is why I like doing cat, right? So the helper, the holster position, actually we can keep this one and just plop it down somewhere. So again, I can say, hey, his pistol holster is right here. So let's put this right where this is actually holstering. And we can separate that geometry and kind of give it its own physics to it and make it dangle as you're running around and moving. So that's fine. That works. Right? Weapon position. So let's click on the hand bone. Right? And let's go to the motion tab right up here. And we have this cool limb animation IK system. If I say create IK target, it creates this crosshair. What I'm going to do is make sure I'm back to the hand, select it. I'm going to say match IK and FK. Now if I change this value to 0 and I select this target and I move it, it now controls the hand. And you see this line that just appeared? Now this is an IK rig, not a FK rig. And if I go back to 1, see it floats back to that. And now this point, we can rename this to weapon bone. And voila, we have created an IKFK weapon bone attachment for it. Cool, nifty trick. I like it. And we can just delete that for now. And delete that for now because we don't have the model skinned. So, extra bones. Let's create another layer. We're going to call this export char. And inside this layer, let's create an object, a standard object primitive plane, and make it small. And that's about a good size. Right click so you don't make any more planes. Go to modify tab, give it 1 and 1. The less geometry, the better. And then what we can do is say right click, convert to editable poly, hit M so we can bring up our material editor. And before I continue this, my material editor likes to crash max, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now it's very important that you save your max file inside the game directory that you're working in. So let me go ahead and find that, which is under inside my SSD projects, XCOM. There we go. So XCOM, assets, objects, characters. We're gonna say new character. We'll call this, I don't know, player for right now, and then we'll just name this player. Good. So I just saved it. Player.max, good to go. So material editor. Next thing we need to do for this, we need to change the name from plane to, let's give this a specific name. Let's call this soldier 1, or it's like a SWAT guy, so I believe he's a SWAT guy, so let's just call this SWAT 1, or SWAT char. No, sorry, skeleton. Scale. That's fine. And then let's zero this out. Not local. Change this back to V is fine. 0, 0, 0. And then we can just put this inside the hips. So I'm just throwing it on the up and down. So on the Z axis. I'm just putting it right somewhere in the center. But make sure Y and X is 0. That's important. Z is fine. Just make sure these two are 0. So we're centered in origin. Alrighty. Next step. So we're going to go back. One more thing we need to do is click on the Bitbull1 helper and say motion extraction node. We get this cool node, linear motion, static orientation, and rename this to from transform space root. Now back to our mesh that we just created. We're going to give a modifier called skin, and for skin, all I did was type out skin. So when I hit this drop down menu, I just typed out SKIN and then immediately knew I wanted a skin. Oops, added 2. So now, before I even add the bone, this is very important. Go to advanced parameters, bone effect limit, change this to 8. Scroll back up now, or back up to the top, bones, add. And what we're adding is just hips. Add the hips. Now we go to the utilities, CryEngine exporter, add selected, CHR, custom file name, 8 weights per vertex, and then we're going to say these 3 little dots, which then brings up this window, and we're going to say SWAT underscore CHR or scalp, like so. Export nodes, done. Now you notice I didn't add any material to this, and the reason why is because 2021, a lot of this changed the way they do their rendering. It's now Arnold. Scale line is now old, but you still can utilize it. And still, I figured this out because I couldn't add the material, Crytek material in the Max. And then I mentioned that to the guys at Crytek, and they're like, oh, question mark. But I figured it out. Go to render setup, change renderer to scale line, and then close this. And now we can select scale line legacy. Now we can say Crytek shader, default, not physicalize, apply to our thing, and then just hit export one more time. No errors. Now to double check on our dude, let's go ahead and boot up the editor. Alright, so CryEngine, XCOM. Let's go to tools, animation character tool, characters, we're in here in skeleton, player, SWAT, animation set filter, say add, hit the folder icon, and we're just gonna say inside animations we don't have a folder, so let's create one and call this SWAT, capital A for anim, or kind of just like the Modus one pretty much. So SWAT anim. I hit OK and I don't know why that happened. So now that's good. File, animation, events. Let's just use the player one for right now. Path, just the main folder. Save. Save. Now, hamburger menu, file, new character. Let's go ahead and drop that into our player folder. We're going to call this SWAT. Specific, I guess we can say SWAT for now. That's fine. And then for skeleton, we're going to say, hey, select our one that we just made. Save. And you notice that nothing came up, right? We get this geometry, display options, skeleton, joints name. There is our skeleton rig. Sweet. Save. You see, I still get this asterisk. I don't know why this happens. Incomplete character cannot be loaded in the engine, but check this out. File, save all. If I go to first person, go back to this, it now works. Go fucking figure. Oh goodness. Okay, so whatever. Anyways, so we have our SWAT skeleton CHR, right? We have our root bone here, and you notice that little geometry. We can make this smaller, so we can get rid of that. But for right now, that's fine. And everything is saved. So let's go back to 30x Max. I'm going to minimize that. Back to Max. Right. Let me go to the model, unfreeze him, and let's just freeze the bones. We don't want to touch any of that. We just want to mess with the model. And we're going to apply the Crytek shader. Default, nothing's physicalized. That's just fine. So once we apply this to the model, now again, I'm doing this pretty quickly because technically the model actually has different material IDs, and that's important. But for right now, what I'm doing is fine, and you'll see not under this. If you go to polygons and select all, we have right here material IDs, right? So this is material ID 1, and technically you want to set up your material properly, but we're just doing this pretty fast. So I'm just gonna just apply that all to everything, and I can just close this now. So starting with the upper part here, we're just gonna say, hey, skin modifier, go down before we do anything, change this to 8, go back up, and you notice that we don't need every single bone, we only need a few, so let's only add the bones we need. Bones, we definitely need the head, we definitely need the hips, we need the collar, we do not need the foot, we need the forearm and the twist, the hand and all its fingers, we don't need the leg, pinky, thumb, the select and everything we need, don't need toe base, do need upper arm, don't need that, and whatever you do not add the platforms, the helpers. Make sure you never do that. Collarbone, forearm, hand, indexes, fingers, don't need the toe base, need the upper arm for sure, and we need the spines. And select. And for some reason it didn't work. Oh, yes, right, because I have these frozen, so let's unfreeze all everything. And now do that again, sorry. I had it all frozen, so this would be easier though. Control, page, whoops, control, head, hips, collarbone, forearm, hand, all these indexes. I believe I can just say like that, or no, it does everything. I swear there's a faster way to do it. Head, hips, collarbone, forearm, hand. Don't need the leg. Don't need the toe base. Do need the upper arm. Do need the neck, collarbone, forearm, hand, and its fingers. Upper arm, spine. Okay, good. So that's all we need. Select. Now you might be wondering, how the fuck do we skin it properly? Good thing you're using Max, because we have this special feature, Weight Solver, voxel. Click this. 6.5 for fall off, 4 for maximum influence. The higher the number, the longer it takes. So we're just do by 512 for right now. Adds accuracy, but slows down the solver. That's fine. Let's add better accuracy and apply. And right down here, you'll see it. Voxelizing model. Give it a second. Hopefully it doesn't burn itself to death. Alright, now, watch this. Let's freeze the model and select the arm. There we go. Perfect. It's skinned. And let's check the fingers. So let's change this from wireframe back to default shading. Let's select all these fingers. So double click on the, not this number 1, but the number 2. And then bend it. See that? Perfect. Ah, sneezed. Okay, and for thumb. Awesome. Look at that. Perfect. Alright, there's some issues though with the arm, and we'll fix that in a second. But for right now, this works. So this is skinned, and then I'm going to show you how to do that fix really quick, because obviously the arm is very close to this portion, so it's encapsulating it. But what we're going to do is say, this arm, snap toggle, so turn these two back on. I'm going to make sure you remember this number. Let's say 55. 55. So 55 rotating upwards, and we had to make sure we go 55 back down. So, see, that's the issue. Both sides, right? Let's upper body. Let's unfreeze that. Let's just unfreeze the upper body. Whoops, yeah, just that. Alright, so the upper body selected. Edit envelopes. And paint weights. We get this cool paintbrush. Hitting the 3 icons there gives you this. And what we want to do is say max size. This is actually way too big. This max size. So let's bring it down to 0.05. Like that. That's better. Alrighty. And then all we need to do is up here, we just need to find this bone. So let's look for it. So we have collarbone, forearm, upper arm, left. So let's start with the left side. Uncheck box this, hold control down, and then left click. And I'm just left clicking and holding. As you can see, I'm painting away. It's becoming absolute 0. If you uncheck this and you hold down control, immediately whatever you paint on becomes 0 for value. So there's no blending in it. And that's fine for right now. And what we're doing is just bringing down the value for all these being affected. And just get rid of all of that. We don't need it affecting the back. Looks good. Alrighty. So now let's check this back on, and let's start from the most reddest point and just blend it back in. So start with the most reddest point. Again, it's good to have the material on and everything like that so you can see it better, so you know like how it deforms. And I'm just make sure the light blue is there. And I'm just giving it a more natural look to it. And that looks good. Awesome. Let's go ahead and move on to the next arm. So that was the left arm. Let's go to right. Upper arm. Same thing. Uncheck this box and just get rid of every value that it's controlling. And there's a lot. Make sure you don't miss anything. So you don't have any of those spikes that you saw. And again, I'm just getting right into it a bit. And you can obviously Control Z your way back out if you accidentally messed up a bit. But hopefully you didn't. You see there's that geometry sticking out. Get rid of that. Good. Sometimes it helps with wireframe mode. Believe it or not, I do it this way. This might look pretty crazy, but it's the way that I do it. I just sit here in wireframe mode and do it. If it's everything's like textured, then I'll do it with default shading on. But again, that's preference. And I want no blue, because blue means that it does affect it. No blue where it shouldn't be. So obviously the arm should not affect anything down here. Turn back on blending, and then now let's blend this back to a more natural look. And be careful, because if you accidentally click here, then this will be affecting this side. So just make sure you kind of watch what you're doing. There's a way that you can select all the vertices, weights, and paste them on the opposite side. There is a way to do that. I just forgot how, and I enjoy doing it this way. This is not faster, but it gives you more control. And again, that copy and paste way kind of only works if it's symmetrical. Once you break symmetry, it's really hard to get that working properly. So right now, this looks good. So now we can deselect this, close this window off, click on edit envelopes, and now we can see how does it look. Much better. Now let's go ahead and select the bone, E for rotate, and let's bring this back down 55. Select the bone, 55. Good to go. Alright, so you notice we didn't add this joint right now. Is kind of this helper. It's actually not within our rig. That's fine for right now. File, save, save again. Alright, good. Alright, now for the interesting part. Oop, I just hit the mic. Hopefully I didn't break no one's ears. Alright, so character rig is, let's assume your character rig is done, right? Well, even though we just skinned the upper body, what I just did, you can apply it to the legs and to the head. So I'm not going to go through that. I'm just going to move on now. How much time did I spend doing this? Okay, not that much time. So weapons. So the reason why I want to say, hey, use the cat rig is because of this. If you select any of the bones, so any bone, Q. I don't want to move anything. Make sure to select the object so you don't accidentally move something. And then let's freeze the model. So everything's frozen. Select the bone, motion, and if we go to this right here, the running man, select that. Oh, sorry about that. My son just came out here to talk to me. So anyways, continuing on. So selecting the running man, we get this cat motion layer. Make sure this is select to play. And as you can see, it's doing some something crazy. But if we go to cat motion editor, select two legs, you get these kind of presets. Game character walk. Double click it, load into existing layer. Move this to the side because this is useful. Now if you look, it does a walk animation for you. And it's not that bad. If we change the timeline to 30, hit OK. Bring this back up. I don't know why it disappeared. Right on this side under globals, change the end to 30 also. And then hit play. It's not that bad. There is some things you're definitely going to have to tweak. There's some tutorials out there on this, and I won't go through it, but as you can tell, this is why I like using cat rigs. You can get a animation up and going really fast, and just tweak it here and there and have it look really pretty good. So just keep that in mind. But what we're actually looking for, let's go ahead and stop that. All I did was hit the stop toggle animation mode. Is if you remember, we had this bone and we applied a create IK target. So we have this dude set up, but what we don't have is weapon animation, right? Now, if you remember, I said it earlier, is that CryEngine allows you to attach skeletons on top of each other, as long as they kind of have at least a reference to one another. They share the same reference. So by that, what I mean is, let me go ahead and find my awesome example weapon. There it is. I'm gonna bring that in. So here's this AK, right? And this AK is pretty much set up, right? All I need to do is select it all, say 0, 0. So now it's in the center of the world. and probably give it its own layer. So let's create a new layer, call this weapon. Enter. And I can hide all the stuff I don't need to see and just focus on the weapon. Now with this setup, bring the center more, like so. We can actually create a cat rig for this weapon, and yeah, we can create a cat rig for this weapon. It might sound pretty silly, but watch this. If we just go to create helpers, create cat objects, let's create a new layer again, but make sure that we don't have nothing selected. So that's the weapon. So let's go to new layer, weapon underscore bones. With that, cat parent. There's nothing here for a weapon, right? As you can see, so none is good. Now we just left click and hold, and size doesn't really matter for this point. We can just keep it small. Right click, zero this out. Again, modify X form, rotate 180, and then now collapse 2. And then what we can say is change the name to weapon bones, create pelvis, and this is not actually going to be called spine. We can call the first bone weapon bone. So weapon bones, weapon bone. Or actually we can go back to here and give it no name. So now this is just weapon bone. That's a lot better. Less confusing too. So weapon, there is a space before it. And then now what we can do is put this bone kind of like probably right here. I mean, we could put it here and just say, hey, hand, put yourself where the weapon bone is. That works too. But there's some things that we can do at IK and snap the hand to the IK position. So let's go with that idea first. So let's just put this kind of like engulfing, like this length. Let's bring it out to the muzzle, or let's bring the length out. We can probably make it a custom bone. So let's bring it out more, bring it forward. So we get this straight length, and then width. Bring it down, height, bring it down. Yep, that's fine. All right. And again, you can actually model this bone, which would then become proxy, but you can model the bone to look exactly kind of like the weapon, but this works. That's what we need it to do. So now all we need to do is say add bone, and you see it kind of, where's weapon? Freeze that so we're not messing with it. If you look inside, it made a bone, and we can say, hey, this bone is called trigger. And we can place this bone where the trigger is. Now remember, the pivot point is on the bottom of this bone, so we do need to rotate this 180 or downwards. So now the pivot is on the top, and then we'll just put it where the trigger would need to rotate. So looking at the trigger, I see that it's already, take off those two snap and just bring it matching, trying to match this line there. As best as I can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but there we go. And then change the size, the front view, so it's kind of like the width of the trigger, like so. That works. Now we can add another bone again. So we'll add a bone, select it, call this maybe mag for the magazine, And once again, all we need to do is say, hey, change our pivot points downwards. Like so. And then make sure it is almost the same width as the magazine. The magazine's pretty fat. And then lengthwise, length is Z, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but that's about right. We can probably do it better just by rotating this more. But you see, we don't want the hand, so let's push this back. That's fine. Alrighty, and then we have that. On the weapon model, if you look at it, we have the actual model itself, the hook, which is this. We can give this a bone too, actually. Mag release, we can give that a bone. Magazine, we already have that. Selector, give this a bone also. Slide, and then trigger. So let's follow that same premise back to the main bone, which is weapon. Let's add another bone. Let's call this, they call it selector, so let's call it the same, selector. And we're just gonna plop that down, oops, not the whole thing, just this, plop this down. Let's look on this side view here, right in the center of this circle. And then rotate. Here is the selector, so let's bring it out to about the same size. That's fine. And then height, width, we can make it pretty thin. Just make sure, since it's so thin, we want to bring it in some. There we go, like so. That works. Now we'll create a new bone, back to the main one though. Make sure you always do it from the hub. So what we have left, selector, slider, so let's create add bone. And it's not called slider, it's actually the charging handle, or the bolt pretty much. So I don't know why they called it slider, it's the bolt really. The AK is a unique weapon. This right here is both charging handle and the bolt. So let's bring this up and then rotate this. Should have put snapping on so it's exactly 90 degrees. 90 degrees. And then what I'm looking for is that the slider starts right there. See that? This line. So I'm going to bring this right, it's pretty much in start position. And then what I'm going to do is make the length as long, almost as long as it. So it ends here. So let's go ahead and bring that out to right where it ends. Probably up more. There we go. Alrighty, so we did trigger already. We have the slide. We have the selector. We have the magazine. What we don't have is the magazine release. So let's go ahead and create that one too. Add bone. Mag release. And then once again, the mag release is right there. And rotate. This doesn't be as perfect. So let's just bring this down. Bring it in more. Yeah, that works. I mean, we can bring it down some too, so there. Good. Now, and for the this right here, I guess I can make a bone for it. Yeah, why not? So add a new bone. Let's put it where this is on its center point. Let's rotate this like so. bring this out to its exact position. And then let's make sure we are pretty solid. Change off snapping so we can get it more accurate. Seems about right. Awesome. And we'll say, what do they call this? The hook? Okay, I guess. It's not what it is, but whatever. Alright, so all is good. So now with all the bones set up, all we need to do is go back to unfreeze the weapons, select the AK. Let's go to graph editor, new schematic view. Let's make sure everything in here, we don't have, well, we kind of do have to make it the child of the AK. But for right now, that's okay. But let's close that out, because what we can do is say this portion here, give it a skin modifier. Same premise, advanced, change this to 8. Add bones, weapon bones. So this is the base, so we're going to just say, is weapon bones 3? That's it. Let's cancel. Hold on. Is it really called? Oh, I switched the names up. Derp. Alright, that's weird. So this is selector for some reason. So let me just put SSS at the end and then make sure this is called selector. And this one here is called weapon bone. I don't know how that happened. Probably wasn't paying attention. Alright, so back to that. Back to the model. Right. With it selected, add bones, weapon bone, select. Now, once that's done, if you actually, you don't need to do any skinning, any of that, because once I select this bone itself and I move it, it moves the weapon. And now we can do the same thing for everything else. So selector, skin, add bones, selector, magazine, same thing, skin, add bones, mag. Now we need the mag release, skin, add bones, mag release, slide, add bones. And I forgot to add the 8 value under advanced. As you can see, it's left to 20, so don't forget to do that. I'm just trying to hurry this up. So slider, which is the bolt, and then trigger, skin, add bones, trigger. Next bit is this hook, which is not a hook, skin, add bones, hook. Now, if I select the main bone, if I move it, everything should move. Good. Now, another thing we can add to is say, hey, add a standard helper box, right? And what we want this box to be is 0, 0, 0, right? So it's center, and then we're going to bring it straight to the muzzle, right about there. And then on this side view, make sure we're pretty much dead center, splitting it. Technically, we can probably bring it in more, or bring it out some. I think right there is fine. Yeah, right there is fine. What we're going to call this is bullet position, and then we're going to shift control muzzle flash, and we're going to bring this back a bit, probably like right here. So, and then graph editor, save schematic view. These two, we're gonna link it. All I did was click this, connect it to the weapon bone. Close that. Let's save. Alright, so now we have our weapon kind of set up, and you notice I made these two helpers, which is part of the skeleton for the weapon, so that way we can use it as a reference point to fire the bullets out and to create a flash point too, so we can create our little particle effect in the front of it. You know, you might be wondering, this seems like a lot to do. Why did we do this? And why we're not programming? Well, again, hey Vaughn, just created my vehicle rig at curves in Maya because I saw many tutorials using that method. With curves and Maya because I saw. Ooh, unfortunately, I don't know Maya. I don't know. For example, yeah, I don't know Maya. What he's asking for is the vehicle rig doesn't need a root bone per se. It's kind of like what we just did with this weapon bone, with this weapon. You know, there is no root to this, right? There is no root. The root is technically the first bone in the hierarchy, which is just weapon bone. So that's its root. All skeletons per se need a root. I mean, we could create the root bone and just put it in the 0 war origin and just leave it there and not worry about it. But there is no root to this. And I'll explain why later, but for right now, I'll help him out in a second after I'm done with this. I actually don't know Maya. I have the program, I just have yet to use it. I don't know what he means by curves. That just throws me off. But anyways, so now with this selected, right, and we're going to say ABS, just ABS animation layer, and we're going to turn, let's leave it off for now. What we're going to do is rename the layer to weapon start position, or you can name it whatever layer you want. Just note that this layer is going to be referenced for exporting, so that's fine. And what we're going to do is turn on our mesh, turn on our bones. Now with the mesh, our guy selected, let's go ahead and delete. So all I did is delete. Let's create a ABS. Name it the same, makes it easier. Weapon position, I think I said start. It's just good to name them the same. I don't know if that's correct, but whatever. And then what we're going to say is, like I said before, click on this, turn on that, and then for the weapon bone, turn it on also. So they're both on now. Select hand, create match 0, go to the other hand, create match 0. Now take this weapon and let's go ahead and position it. Let's give it a position, kind of like a low ready. Nice start position. And then now let's take the hand bone and give it a position of grabbing it. Right. Let's just assume, I'm not going to go through this step, but again, obviously you would just, rotate the hand, kind of set it up where it needs to go, right, like there. So And then take this hand, bring it in, rotate it. Kind of where it needs to go. And then it would be technically gripping this. And then I would select the upper shoulder, rotate this out. Like that. That looks fine. Now this is a cool method. If I select this, the crosshair, and go to assign controllers, make sure we're on our layer, see weapon position start, add a link constraint, and I come back down, I said add link, and make sure you just select the weapon bone, disable that, and then go to the next crosshair on the other hand, same thing, assign controllers, on the layer, link constraint, add link, weapon bone, turn that off, and then now if I just select a weapon and I move it, there we go. And obviously you would have to touch it up a bit, so if I wanted to just rotate this out, rotate this in, rotate this in, so we're kind of perfectly like that, straight up and down, bring this up to the shoulder, take my arm doesn't need to be that far out, take this bone, some funkiness, but you get the gist. You just have to mess with it a bit. Select a weapon, bring this out. See this hand, it can't reach it. The reason why is because your collar here, this actually pushes forward like so. This actually comes back a bit. Now you have a more natural look. And then this sits more into your shoulder, up higher. And as you can see, now we have kind of like this shooting position. And we can animate this, export it out, and some fun stuff. I'm gonna save this for now. Yes. Okay. And we're gonna stop here. It's actually becoming a lot longer than I expected, unfortunately. Around 2 hours. But we're just presetting things up. Just to reiterate what we went over. We set up our character. Again, you can finish the rest. The upper body is the same as the lower body. That's why I didn't skin the lower body. And then head is the same. And then tweak it, or make sure you go to your skeleton and your mesh, and edit the envelopes and just paint weight so you get that more better look. And then as you can see, we linked these two IK controllers to the weapon, so now you can get a better, you can create your recoil animation, you can create your running animation with your weapon, and it sticks to the hands. Looks very more natural. You just have to tweak it around. I kind of did this on the fly pretty fast. And then we can export these animations out, and we can export the rig out for the firearm, and then we can use that within code. So save, always save. And then I'm going to close this out, come back to it, go back to our programming. All right, and what we can do is, we can pretty much, or in our next tutorial, we're going to start off with the weapon component. So I just kind of did that pre-setup and showed you the pre-setup because it was my idea to say, wait a second, if I do this on on my own and then just threw it into the editor and say, hey, here's your character. Here's you're probably questioning like how did I accomplish that? That's why I kind of stopped programming for a moment, showed that portion of the tutorial so you get an understanding of that, and then we're going to go back to programming on the next video. So on your own, finish your character. I'll say finish if you have weapons and do it that way, and then you can just, if you remember, we created a CHR file, right? In a CHR file, you do have to put a piece of geometry, like a plane, that barely has any polygons, skin it to the root bone, which should be the weapon bone, export that out as a CHR, reference what it needs to reference, and then create a CDF file called weapon, AK or whatever, and then bam, you have your weapon bone skinned. And the first bone in that joint hierarchy is weapon. So then you just have to make a weapon bone for character, and then they'll just join together, and then you can extend the character bone. And there's a great video on that describing that process. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, YouTube. There's a great video from Crytek from a while ago that kind of explains that theory and how it works, and it's really, really brilliant. Go to my... Where are you? I was just watching it too because I was trying to get... There you go. Masterclass. I'm going to leave this in a link too. This is a great video, and he talks about it pretty far into the video. God damn it, YouTube, shut up. Right here. Skeleton extensions. So he's... So we're using that method, skeleton extensions, so we can just add the gun, right? And then we can turn it off and on, just like they show you here, the nerve joints. So really good video. Watch it, and it kind of give you an idea of what we're approaching. And you can do the same thing for vehicles too. I've done that with vehicles. So anyways, I'm gonna end it now and pick up for part 3. We're gonna move on to the weapon-based component. Hopefully you have everything set up on your end for the weapon. Like I said, watch that video. As you can see, I made the character file and the weapon file in the same max file. That's fine as long as you're organized. If you have any issues, ask me on Discord, and I'll try to explain it in my best ability. Or if you want to learn more about the character or weapon setup within Max and kind of have it, I'll make another video for that separately. And I hope to see you guys next time.